You were taught that the predator is a tragic figure. You have been conditioned to believe that extreme malevolence is merely the result of unresolved trauma, a biological anomaly, or a cry for help that went unanswered. This is one of the most persistent and dangerous distortions in modern psychology. It is a comforting lie designed to protect your ego from a terrifying reality. That some minds are not broken, they are simply organized around a different axis. The truth is far more clinical and far more condemning. A figure like Jeffrey Epstein is not a mistake of nature. He is not a glitch in the human system. He is a highly efficient, fully functional manifestation of the collective shadow. He is what happens when the human will severs its connection to conscience and dedicates itself entirely to the architecture of domination. To view him as a victim of his own pathology is to fall into the very trap he set. It is to project humanity onto a mind that has voluntarily rejected it. Today, we are not looking for excuses. We are mapping the mechanics of a psyche that viewed other human beings not as souls, but as fuel. We are examining how the libido constitutes a will to power, and how the unexamined corners of society provide the perfect camouflage for monsters to hunt. We are stripping away the tabloid sensationalism. We are not interested in the lurid details for the sake of entertainment. Those are distractions. We are interested in the structural engineering of evil. We will be conducting a Jungian analysis of the archetypal predator, using this specific case study to illuminate 3 critical psychological structures that you must understand to protect your own sovereignty. First, we will examine the collective shadow, so how a corrupt elite structure does not just tolerate a predator, but actively selects him to metabolize their own prohibited desires. Second, we will dismantle the psychology of control, looking at the Dark Triad not as a mental illness, but as a rigid, calcified persona, a mask that became the face. And finally, we will analyze the corruption of sexual power, where the libido ceases to be a force of connection and becomes purely a mechanism of consumption. This is not a biography. It is an autopsy of the modern collective unconscious. We do not dissect the pathology to justify it. We dissect it to recognize the machinery of predation. Because this archetype does not get eliminated in a prison cell, it is a recurring pattern in the human psyche. And until you understand how it operates, you remain vulnerable to it. We must begin with the environment that empowered him. There is a persistent tendency to view the predator as an infiltrator, a wolf who tricked the sheep. This is inaccurate. In the stratification of high society, the predator is often an invited guest. He is necessary. Carl Jung proposed that every society possesses a collective shadow. These are the impulses, the greed, and the perverse desires that a civilization publicly condemns, but many privately crave. When a society becomes hyper-fixated on the appearance of virtue, on the polished veneer of philanthropy and status, the shadow does not vanish. It thickens. It becomes pressurized. It demands a container. Jeffrey Epstein functioned as this container. This serves a specific function for the elite collective. By outsourcing their darkest impulses to a central figure, the surrounding network can maintain their own illusion of morality. They can participate by proxy. This is what Jung referred to as unconscious participation or participation mystique. As long as there is a designated high priest of the shadow, the others can indulge their vices without carrying the psychological weight of them. He absorbs the moral stain so they can remain clean. He was not hiding in plain sight. He was operating in plain sight because he was performing a service. The phenomenon of an open secret is not a failure of intelligence, but a successful compartmentalization of the collective psyche. He acted as a sin eater for a class of people who believe they are gods. This dynamic explains the magnetic pull he possessed. He held the projection of absolute unchecked freedom. In a world where most people are bound by laws, ethics, and social contracts, the man who bypasses all boundaries becomes a gravitational point for those with weak characters. He embodies the terrifying liberty of the shadow. The elite were drawn to him not because they were tricked, but because he possessed a solidity of will that they lacked. He represented the Übermensch in its most distorted, cancerous form, a being who has transcended morality through the total rejection of empathy. However, this role comes with a terminal clause. The shadow container is always destined to become the scapegoat. When the light of exposure hits the network, the collective immediately disowns the vessel. The very society that fed him, used him, and protected him suddenly projects all of its accumulated guilt onto him. This allows the collective to wash its hands. By destroying the vessel, they believe they have destroyed the impulse. This is a delusion. The predator was merely the focal point. The pathology remains in the system that created him. He was a willing participant, yes, but he was also the inevitable product of a culture that worships power devoid of conscience. This is not a system failure, it is a system feature. We move now to the internal structure of the individual. To understand the psychology of control, we must look at the Jungian concept of the persona and its relationship to the Dark Triad, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. You were taught that a narcissist is simply someone who loves themselves. This is a misunderstanding. A pathological narcissist of this caliber creates a grandiose persona, not to protect a fragile self, but to replace the self entirely. There is no inner child crying for help here. There is only a void that demands to be filled with the submission of others. This is not a defense mechanism in the traditional sense. It is a predatory adaptation. For the predator, the persona is a weaponized suit of armor. Any admission of weakness, any moment of genuine vulnerability is viewed as an existential threat. This drives the obsession with control. Control is not a preference for them, it is their oxygen. This is why the manipulation is so sophisticated. It is not a game, it is an architectural necessity. If you control the environment, the blackmail, the finances, and the narrative, you never have to face the internal vacuum. This is efficiency, not fear. Consider the psychology of the spider. The Machiavellian mind views other human beings strictly as objects. This is a crucial distinction. To the predator, you are not a person with a soul. You are a resource. You are a chess piece. This is not a failure of empathy. It is a deliberate suppression of it to maximize utility. The web is spun to secure the perimeter, gathering dirt, compromising powerful figures, and recording transgressions. This is not just for insurance. It is a way of binding others to the web of the shadow. If everyone around you is compromised, no one has the moral high ground to judge you. The mirror is broken. The illusion of the God complex is preserved. This explains the lack of remorse. You cannot feel remorse for an object you have used. When a carpenter cuts wood, he does not apologize to the tree. When a predator consumes a life, he does not apologize to the victim. He views it as his natural right. This is the ultimate rigidity of the persona. The mask finish has fused fit to the face. The human element has been surgically removed to make room for the mechanism. In Jungian terms, this is identification with the persona to the point of spiritual death. The man you see is a hollow construct, animated only by the drive to dominate. Finally, we must address the specific nature of the pathology, the sexual element. But here we must be very precise. We are not talking about desire in the conventional sense. We are talking about the corruption of the libido into a pure will to power. For Jung, libido was psychic energy, the force of life, creativity, and connection. In a healthy psyche, this energy flows outward to connect, to create, to nurture. In the pathological psyche, the flow reverses. It becomes centripetal. It turns inward. It transforms into a black hole. The acts committed were not about pleasure. They were about the consumption of vitality. This is the archetype of the devouring father, or the negative senex. This archetype represents the old king who refuses to yield the throne. Instead of blessing the youth, he consumes them to sustain his own fading relevance. He eats the future to prolong the present. There is a vampiric quality to this dynamic. The target is always innocence, potential, and life. By dominating that which is full of life, the predator briefly feels alive. They steal the mana, the spiritual energy of the victim. This is an energetic transaction as much as a physical one. It is the ultimate act of objectification. To reduce a human being to a biological function is to strip them of their sovereignty. For Amun et, obsessed with his own sovereignty, this is the ultimate assertion of dominance. I am the subject, you are the object. I am real, you are merely a prop in my reality. This is why the scale of the abuse is often so industrial. It is not about the individual encounter, it is about the accumulation. It is hoarding. Just as one hoards money to feel secure against poverty, the predator hoards bodies to feel secure against death. This is not a tragedy of a broken man. This is the calculated cruelty of a man who looked at the human soul and saw something to be harvested. It is a spiritual cannibalism. The hunger is eternal because the vessel is broken. No amount of consumption can ever fill a void that is infinite. It is the definition of a hell realm, an eternal hunger that can never be fed, only temporarily distracted by the destruction of others. When we analyze this case through the Jungian lens, the picture shifts. We move from simple outrage to a complex clinical understanding of the human shadow. He was a manifestation of a collective that worships power without conscience. He was a case study in the petrification of the psyche, where the persona becomes a fortress and the soul is evicted. And he was an example of what happens when the life force is twisted into a death drive, where the desire to connect is replaced by the compulsion to consume. The danger now is to think that because the man is gone, the archetype is dead. This is naive. The archetype of the predator exists in the potentiality of every human psyche and in the blind spots of every society. To protect yourself, you must learn to recognize this energy. You must learn to track the emotional incongruence, the lack of empathy, and the frantic need for control. You must withdraw your projections and see these figures not as powerful, but as parasitic. This is not a pleasant realization, but true awareness never is. It does not offer comfort. It offers clarity, and clarity is the only weapon you have against the dark. This is what a healed mind becomes. It does not look away. It sees the mechanism and refuses to be food.